Welcome to Adventures in Accessibility, a podcast that explores the far reaches of disability, access, and inclusion, with your host, Emily Schumann.
Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today's guest is Andrés Gallegos. He is the chairman of the National Council on Disability as appointed by President Bident. In addition, he is a shareholder at the law firm Robbins DiMonte and the chair of their disability rights practice, where he concentrates on improving access to healthcare and wellness for persons with all types of disabilities across the country. He is the immediate past chairman of the board of directors of Access Living of Metropolitan Chicago, Chicago's Center for Independent Living, and is a two-term past member of the Statewide Independent Living Council of Illinois, having been appointed by the governor. He's also a board member of ADA 25 Advancing Leadership Institute, a Chicago-based nonprofit whose mission is to increase civic engagement and diverse leadership in the Chicago region by developing and building a network of leaders with disabilities. Mr. Gallegos is the 2015 recipient of the Paul G. Hearn Leadership Award from the American Association of People with Disabilities. He has written numerous articles for national and state professional healthcare and legal organizations on matters relating to the application of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act. He is a highly sought-out lecturer on accessible healthcare and disability rights. He graduated with honors from the University of Southern Mississippi with a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration, and he attained a Juris Doctorate from the St. Louis University School of Law. He is a veteran of the United States Air Force, serving honorably for 14 years. All right, well, hi, Andrés. Thank you so much for being our guest today. We're so pleased to have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
So our listeners just heard, your bio, which is just teeming with amazing work and accomplishments. We'd love to know, out of all of that, what is the work that you're most proud of and what are you most passionate about?
I think the work that I'm most proud of is what's not reflected in that bio. And that is when I sustained my injury as a result of an automobile accident 26 years ago. My children at that time were 5 and 3 years old. And I mention them because that's what I'm most proud of. Because they're now very successful, independent adults with their own families. And to see them grow up and thrive, even having to deal with the issues that we've had to deal with as a family because of the sudden and acquired disability, to me is what I'm immensely proud of. And so I just want to start out with that because, what often gets neglected, what I find, when an individual acquires a disability and suddenly acquires a disability is the sudden impact it has on the family. And when I sustained my spinal cord injury as a result of an automobile accident 26 years ago this November, immediately when I was at the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago, individuals that I was there with, I saw their families walk away from them and abandon them because they were afraid of what was coming. They were afraid of the sudden change and what their presumably loved ones were going through. And I always reflect upon that because I am blessed with the fact that nobody abandoned me in my family. But I'm also cognizant that that happens every single day just because of the drain, the stress, the lack of resources, the lack of attention that's often given to people with disabilities and the struggle that comes with being a person with a disability. It weighs on a family. It weighs on a community. It weighs on people who love someone. So that's a long way of saying, what I'm most proud of is the fact that we've been able to raise 2 incredibly successful kids. And now I'm a grandfather of 2 grandsons. And so that's really what I'm most proud of.
I love that. Well, you alluded to it already a little bit, but what can you share with us about your disability and how it impacts you and your daily life and also how it informs your work?
It drives me personally and professionally. I am a person with disability, class of 1996. I sustained a spinal cord injury in a car accident on November 26, 1996. As a result of spinal cord injury, I have quadriplegia. And so I have a gross motor movement of my arms and I have sensation above the chest line. I use a power wheelchair to get around. Over the 26 years, I've learned that my disability does not define who I am, but it's an incredible part of me. It's a disability that I can't hide from others. And believe me, when I was first injured and sustained my spinal cord injury, I wanted to hide the fact that I was disabled because I had sadly internalized all the negative stereotypes that existed at that time about people with disabilities. And it took me a number of years to fully embrace my disability. But once I did, the world changed for me. I became more confident. I became more willing to put myself out there and to get back and doing the things that I really enjoyed doing prior to becoming disabled. And since then, because of the issues that I've had to confront as a person with disability, just getting basic access to healthcare services, to eye care examinations, to dental care, knowing that I had a voice and I had the education as an attorney to speak on behalf of those that couldn't speak for themselves or didn't know what their rights were. That really drove me to establish a disability rights practice, which is now a national disability rights practice at our law firm, where we primarily focus on improving access to healthcare and wellness programs for people across all categories of disabilities throughout the country. That's not the only thing we focus on, but it's the main focus of what we do. And so being a person with disability and having acquired a disability has really fueled me professionally and personally to make a difference.
And, given that you kind of are in a position where you wear several different hats, can you give us a little bit of a picture of kind of what does a day in your life consist of typically?
Oh my, not enough sleep. I am the chairman of the National Council on Disability. I've been with the National Council on Disability since 2018 when I was congressionally appointed by Senator Schumer. And then on the afternoon of his inauguration, President Biden designated me as the chairman of the National Council on Disability. If you're not familiar, your listeners are not familiar with the National Council on Disability, we are the smallest independent federal agency in all of government. And our charge is to advise the president, his administration, Congress, and federal agencies on policy matters affecting people with disabilities, not only in the country, but in our territories as well. And so there's portions of a day since 2018 where I'll be working on matters on behalf of the National Council on Disability. And then I also have a full-time practice as a lawyer, and I spearhead our firms at Robbins DiMonte Limited, our firm's national disability rights practice. So throughout the day, I'm either doing things for National Council on Disability or I am doing my day job as an attorney. But I also sit on the boards of a couple of nonprofits. One is Access Living in Metropolitan Chicago, which is Chicago's Center for Independent Living and one of the premier centers for independent living in all of country. And I was its immediate past chairman, and I've been on the board there for 12 years. I'm also a board member of Disability Lead, which is an innovative nonprofit in Chicago that has as its mission to develop and encourage people with disabilities to attain leadership positions in nonprofit organizations and also within government as well. And so we really train future leaders with disabilities to assume those positions. And I sit on the board of a couple of other nonprofits as well, disability related. So my days and nights are consumed with all things advancing and trying to improve the lives of people with disabilities.
Well, I can see why you might not get enough sleep. That's a lot you have going on. So I'm really curious about this for you, especially because you're a lawyer and you're also a person with an acquired disability. So when and how did you learn about the Americans with Disabilities Act?
I had to immerse myself in it as a matter of survival, right?
Yeah.
Once I acquired my disability, I was incredibly naive, thinking the exceptional care that I received at the then Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago, which now is known as Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, that the care that I received there would be comparable to the care, and how welcomed I felt there would be. I'd be received as welcomed in all healthcare settings. But once I left the RIC, I quickly learned that that wasn't the case, that I couldn't get a basic physical examination because my healthcare provider was either unwilling or unable to transfer me from my wheelchair onto the examination table. I hardly ever got weighed when I went to go see my doctor. And that was even when he had to prescribe medication that was, the dosage was dependent upon accurate height and weight measurement. So, and then just trying to get back and forth into work knowing that there was not reliable, accessible transportation.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things led me to believe that I thought these things would come quite naturally and would be open and accessible to me, but I quickly learned that that wasn't the case. So for my own self-preservation, I had to find out truly what my rights were under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and then take advantage of those rights and assert those rights. And so that's really how I came about learning intimately about the Americans with Disabilities Act and the other federal regulations that give us civil rights and legal rights.
And speaking of accessible travel, in your pre-interview questionnaire, you mentioned airline travel is kind of one of the biggest challenges that you face as a wheelchair user. What can you tell us about that?
It's a frightening experience. And just the prospect of having to travel, and I travel quite a bit, and I've traveled using different modalities. We've driven to locations because of the concerns of flying. We've taken Amtrak because of the concerns of flying to the various destinations. And here's what happens when you fly when you're a person who uses a wheelchair. There are times where your wheelchair does not get to the destination where you're flying to. There's times when your wheelchair arrives, but it's broken from the mishandling and mistreatment of it, either during the loading process or the unloading process at your destination. And when that happens, there's no service that's available at the airport that can assist you to immediately fix what is broken. I've had the good fortune of having my chair broken, but not to a point where it wasn't inoperable. So I could still do what I needed to do and get where I needed to get. And more importantly, I could leave the airport on my own without having to have my wife, who's always my companion when I travel via airlines, have to push me in the chair. And a power wheelchair weighs 425 pounds on its own as configured. And with me in it, that's additional weight and doesn't move easily manually. There's the fear and there's the apprehension that the wheelchair simply is not going to be there. It's not going to be there in the form in which we left it in the hands of the airlines. That's always a concern. The additional concern is how I am physically handled when I'm transferred from my chair onto the airline. The airlines have a little small, narrow aisle chair that they use to transfer you from your wheelchair into your seat, your designated seat on an airline and on an aircraft. And so when they lift me, we always have to coach them on how to do that because they simply just want to grab me from underneath my arms, and often it hurts my shoulders, it hurts my back. So we really got to be careful in giving them instruction and guidance on how to properly and safely transfer me. And I've heard and read of stories of similar situations, throughout the country that it really inhibits individuals with mobility disabilities who use mobility devices that can't independently transfer or bear weight and walk on their own, ambulate in any fashion. It really inhibits their ability to travel and see the country and certainly to see the world. I haven't made a trip overseas. And so I don't know what that experience would be, but I know how it is here. And it's just frightening the prospect of having to do international travel and not knowing what condition your wheelchair is going to be in and not knowing what resources there may be on the other side if in fact the wheelchair does break.
What recourses do people have when they have those types of negative travel experiences?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, right? Many airlines now have adopted programs whereby they will reimburse for the repairs that are needed, or they will pay for the repairs that are needed. But sometimes it's not always guaranteed, right? And so the ADA allows individuals to sue airlines for any damages that are sustained by the chairs, but that's a very difficult process and time consuming to do, right? I mean, when the chair is broken, if you only have one chair, which many people do, you need that fixed immediately just so that you can survive, so you can go on living your daily existence, whatever that may be. You need something quicker than what a lawsuit can provide, right? A lawsuit, if you prevail, if you have to take it all the way through trial, can take up to 3 years. It can't be that you're 3 years without your chair being repaired. So most airlines have adopted programs now where you can file a claim and they will pay for the repair. There's also programs through the Department of Transportation under the Air Carriers Access Act that can expedite resolutions of these kinds of disputes. In the near future, we're hopeful that legislation gets passed where we're able to stay in our wheelchairs and fly while we remain in our wheelchairs. We know that the Department of Transportation is now looking at regulations and standards together with the U.S. Access Board to make it so that airlines can remove seats so that we can remain in our chairs, safely locked down and travel so we don't have to experience those issues like we're experiencing right now. So again, long way of saying there are possibilities of getting redress in the event that individuals' chairs are broken. They're certainly not fast enough and they're certainly not guaranteed. So a lot still needs to be done to protect the rights of people with disabilities as they travel.
As a lawyer who works on disability rights, what are some of the cases that you've been involved in that you feel have been most impactful?
Well, look, one of the first cases that we've had was a class action lawsuit against 7 of the leading retail eye care providers. In Chicago, we're fortunate that it seems like on every block there's a different national provider of eye care services. From LensCrafters to Pearl Vision to America's Best to Four Eyes, among others. And what happened to me was 10 to 12 years ago, I tried getting an eye examination at Four Eyes, which is right across from our office. And I was informed that the only way they could give me an examination was if I was able to independently transfer from my wheelchair onto the examination chair, which I could not. And because I couldn't, they refused to provide me with an eye examination. And so then I went down the block to Pearl Vision, and I had the same reaction. I went down a further block to LensCrafters, and the same type of reaction. At one eye care provider, they offered to conduct a manual examination for me, but the optometrist admitted she hadn't done that for 20 years. And so again, either I received no examination or I received significantly less of an examination and thorough of an examination that someone who could sit down in an examination chair received. So we found out that that was only happening in Chicago, it was happening throughout the country, and certainly wasn't just happening to me. So we filed 7 class action lawsuits against the national leading eye care providers. And we're able to get those all settled to require them to, if the chairs, examination chairs, could not easily roll away, to put equipment underneath the chairs. So it allows optometrists and other staff to move the chair out of the way so that I can position myself while I'm in my wheelchair where the examination chair is and have all the equipment that's necessary for the examination to come to me on height adjustable, accessible tables so that I may be able to access all the equipment that's necessary to receive a proper and thorough examination. So today, if you walk into any or roll into any of the national eye care providers, as a person who uses a wheelchair, you should be able to stay in your wheelchair and receive a thorough and proper examination. So that's what got us started. And that's why it's been incredibly impactful. We've also had significant impact regionally with healthcare systems in making sure that they have accessible inpatient rooms for people with disabilities, and that they address the needs of the disability community, whether that's ensuring that they have sign language interpreters to assist individuals who are deaf and hard of hearing communicate with basic communication in emergency rooms and in all clinical settings, and certainly making sure that they have accessible inpatient rooms and examination rooms so that people with disabilities can be seen and treated, again, receive the same opportunity to receive comparable care as people who are not disabled. Another area we've had significant progress is improving sidewalks and access to public rights of way in municipalities. Now, we're just wrapping up a class action lawsuit in Pekin, Illinois, which is right outside of Peoria, Illinois, in central Illinois, where for decades the disability community, which is quite sizable, have been trying to get their municipality to improve curb cuts and to improve sidewalks so that they can go out on their own independently to get back and forth within the city to visit different establishments or simply just to get out and get some fresh air. And throughout the city, there were just incredible barriers, either disrepair of sidewalks, the absence of curb cuts, or the city would put just these massive planters in the middle of a sidewalk, which would block the ability of somebody in a wheelchair to try to get around that planter safely and still remain on the sidewalk. And that impeded their ability to integrate within the city and to take advantage of all things that the city offers, whether for recreation or for business. And in lieu of that, they've had to navigate and compete unsafely with traffic in the streets, just trying to roll around for their daily business. So that's the kind of work that we do, and that's the kind of impact that we've had, and we're quite proud of.
So you mentioned already kind of some changes hopefully that will be coming when it comes to, that airplane
Yeah.
accessibility. What are some other hopes that you have for the future of accessibility and disability inclusion?
I hope to not have a job here in the near future, right? That
Hmm.
our disability practice will be very limited in scope because businesses would fully embrace what their federal non-discrimination mandates are. But what we found time and time again, and what we are finding, and it's not certainly unique to Chicago or Illinois, is that most businesses still are non-compliant with the federal non-discrimination mandates. It's still difficult to get into restaurants. It's still difficult to get good seating at sporting events or at concerts. It's still difficult for people who are deaf and hard of hearing to get sign language interpreters when they desperately need it, when they go to hospitals, when they go to the emergency rooms, even with their encounters with law enforcement. Sign language interpreters are not being provided to them when they're supposed to be provided to them,
Hmm.
simply to engage with law enforcement. People with intellectual and developmental disabilities have to travel for hours away from their home simply to find a dental care provider that is
Hmm.
willing and able to treat them. So there's a number of different things that need to be fixed. Leadership makes a difference in the federal government and state government, and so you have federal leaders and you have state leaders that are willing to address the needs of people with disabilities and are willing to prioritize people with disabilities. That makes a difference. I think that at the moment we have the right federal partners to get things done at the federal level to amend uh, the Section 504 regulations
Hmm.
that require any recipient of federal financial assistance to ensure that they do not discriminate against people with disabilities. And that is a condition of receiving federal financial assistance. There's going to be changes to those regulations that are going to make a meaningful impact upon the lives of people with disabilities. We're trying to get changes to the Americans with Disabilities Act regulations as well to enhance the ability of people who are deaf and hard of hearing to receive sign language interpreters or other auxiliary aids and services when they need them.
Hmm.
Also for people who are blind and have visual impairments as well. So there's room for improvement, but I think leadership makes a difference, and I think at the moment we have the right leaders in place that are willing to make a difference here.
What would you say to listeners who are feeling defeated right now, either because of personal struggle or because of current events?
Listen, I'm with you, right? There's things that happen throughout the day that just are discouraging. We're troubled right now by decisions that are being made by the Supreme Court that are rolling back our rights. We have to stick together. We collectively, as a community, our voice needs to be heard more so today than ever before. And, we have to be smart in our advocacy, but continue the advocacy and be ever present as we have been, because our rights in this Congress, in the Supreme Court, and again, depending on which parties come to power and whether or not the parties in power are willing to address the needs of people with disabilities, is always going to be a question. So we have to speak out and we have to continue going on. It's one thing to be discouraged and be discouraged and be active, but being discouraged and deciding to not participate in the political process and not engaging in advocacy is going to be detrimental to all of us. So we need every voice to speak out and to address the issues that are affecting the community, not just people with disabilities, but we need our able partners to speak out with us as well. Let's remind ourselves that the Americans with Disabilities Act only became possible 32 years ago because of the efforts of both the able and disabled community. The great thing that's occurring is that disability is really affecting everybody in the country. There's over 61.4 million people with disabilities in the country, and that's before long COVID. As a result of COVID, there's an additional 1.5 million people with the effects of long COVID that have joined the ranks of our disabled community. And because of the prevalence of community of disability, 1 out of every 4 persons in the country has a disability. And so that's really affecting every household in America. And for me, the more the merrier, because it really emphasizes that a disability can and does occur to everybody and touches everybody
Right.
Within the country. And so the more the merrier, the greater the numbers, the greater our presence to get things done collectively. It's a shame that we don't vote as a bloc, as a political bloc. But imagine the power that we would wield if, in fact, we did, because we would be the largest minority group if we were considered to be a former minority group.
That's all really great advice and wisdom. So if folks want to connect with you after today's episode, what would be the best way to get a hold of you?
The best way to get a hold of me would be through email at agallegos@robbinsdimonte.com.
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners, or anything that we didn't ask that we should have?
I would encourage our listeners to really get involved in everything that's taking place today. And I know you're making a difference in your community and continue that work. Know that you're not alone. You have individuals that care deeply about the issues that are affecting people with disabilities. And if we continue to work together and work smartly, we can be a significant difference to improve the lives of all of us and everybody else who comes after us, who are people with disabilities. And together we can really make a difference in ensuring that society in general views disability as a natural part of the human condition, not something to be feared, not something to be afraid of, and certainly not something to be ashamed of as well.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
It's been my pleasure, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Adventures in Accessibility. Tune in next time for another dive into the unknown.
Adventures in Accessibility is hosted by Emily Schumann, and Jessica Lucinia is our sound engineer. This podcast is a project of the Rocky Mountain ADA Center and is funded under a grant from the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research. Grant number 90DPAD0009-01-00. This production is intended solely for entertainment and informal guidance and should not be considered legal advice. The opinions expressed by guests are not necessarily held or endorsed by the Rocky Mountain ADA Center.